Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a very stellar panel with us today, and I'd like to introduce my panelists, starting with Ms. Elba Bueno Cabrera. She is manager of the Maritime cluster of the Canary Islands. Next is Ms. Angelique Pouponneau, CEO of Seychelles Conservation and Adaptation Trust. We also have Dr. Carlos Lopes, Honorary Professor of Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance in South Africa. And last but not the least, we have Mr. Marc, Naidoo, partner at McGuireWoods, London, LP. So that's our panel. And today we are going to be discussing this very important subject of oceans and blue economy. So without wasting more of your time, I'd like to start by posing a question to Dr. Lopes. Dr. Lopes, you are a leader in issues of policy. So let me ask you, what should be the role of maritime resources in national development strategies and policies?
Thank you, Obi. I think blue economy has been neglected as part of the potential that should be strategized in different partnerships between Africa and the rest of the world. When we were drafting the Agenda 2063 of the African Union, I was one of the drafters. We put it right at the center because of its importance. When you look into the dimension that probably was discussed in the previous panel, which is how we access and utilize water that is generated inside the continent, basically fresh water. We tend to neglect the fact that the vast difficulties that we are facing in terms of access to water do not necessarily retract from 27% of the world reserves of fresh water being in Africa, which is quite significant. So it's more a question of how we appropriately take advantage of the potential. But more importantly, when we look into the coasts and the oceans, then you have an amazing 38 states out of the 55 of Africa that are coastal. We have about 13 million square kilometers of coast, which gives us territorial waters that are the largest for any continent. And we know that this is quite rich when we look into how many different countries have their fleets fishing our waters. But we have not yet looked into the potential that exists beyond, looking with adversity to this stealing of our natural resources. But because in fact, the debate about climate change is focusing more and more about the energy transition, which is the most important aspect of the climate transition. And it's impossible to attain these very ambitious targets of net zero and also reduction of the rise of temperatures without resources like green hydrogen, which are very much appealing for investment and for a variety of technical reasons to launch in the confluence between desert and sea. And again, that the largest potential in the world is in Africa. But we have also strategic minerals that exist in Africa that could, in the future, be part of these various transitions, particularly how we are going to manufacture. In the future is going to be through access to new forms of mobility like electric vehicles. We are going to make manufacturing much more dependent on 3D. We are going to be much more dependent on technology that we already are. All of these different streams depend on minerals that are in vast majority found in Africa, sometimes with a controlling stake of the production possibly going to be in Africa, like coltan for cobalt, like graphite for 3D, and rare earths that now are basically mostly in China, exploited in China, have huge potential in Africa as well. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that we have not paid enough attention to the blue economy that is so central for the future. But what are we going to do with what we already are facing today? Yes. And basically we have the coastal areas serving about 90% of our economy, one way or another, through imports, exports, the agglomerations, the demographics, and tourism and other activities. So I think this debate is much more central than most people realize. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's elucidating. I think let me go to Elba. Elba, the small island developing countries have actually done quite substantial work, as far as the blue economy is concerned. So what do you think the international community can learn from these small island developing states and, and traditional fishing communities?
Okay, we are not a country, okay? Yeah. Excuse me, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, okay, to this important forum. I would like to say that we are not a country, we are a region, a regional autonomic community. So we depend of the central government of Spain. It's very important to say that we are our outermost region of Europe, a strategic point in the south of Europe. And with this condition, we have a special fiscal and economic regime of the rest of Spain that would help us to be a point of interest for investment and business development to help the generation of employment in our region. But in contra, we have a big problem with the permits of different administrations that this project needs to pass. So sometimes these bureaucratic problems that we have make the investment or the project could develop here, go to other places. Regarding traditional fishing in our islands, this activity represents only 1% of the contribution of the blue economy. We have been losing this activity in the last years in favor of our other activities, such as aquaculture, in which we have a very good condition, as could be the quality and temperature of our water. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Ms. Pouponneau, Seychelles has done tremendous work in the whole area of the blue economy, and there has been talk about the issue of debts for nature swap and sovereign blue bond. And then there's also been talk about the blended finance innovation that affect it. So what do you think blended finance innovation how can that impact the issue of debt for nature swap and the sovereign blue bond?
No, thank you for the question, and thank you for the invitation as well to contribute. So, being an African small island developing state, for us, we have the ocean is our only focus, right? It is the bedrock of our two main pillars of our economy, as it relates to tourism as well as fisheries. So for a long time, we've always focused on the ocean as providing us with food, livelihoods, and so on. But now thinking about how do we ensure that the utility of that ocean is in fact sustainable, so we can continue to benefit from the resources that it has. So as it relates to financing, one of the things that many countries, I think, all appreciate sooner rather than later is as we transition to the blue economy, or we opt for things like making conservation a tool for the development of our ocean, there will be a need for financing. And that's something that is on everyone's mind, sometimes very rarely talked about, But what Seychelles has done is to really explore what innovative forms of financing we could look to support that transition and certain conservation efforts. Just to put things into context as well, why we have opted for blended finance. And blended finance only means leveraging public funds to attract private capital, right, or philanthropy. So the reason we've turned that way is because as a small island developing state, and this will probably be quite a shocking number, but we have a population of only 95,000 people. So our GDP is quite high because of the very small population that we have. As a result, we don't have access to finance, like concessionary loans and things like this. So innovative finance, such as debt for nature swaps, which in short means restructuring our debt on the promise that we will reach a sustainability target. So basically, we say that our debt will be on more favorable terms. We can pay it over a longer period of time, lower interest rates, but you must promise to protect 30% of the exclusive economic zone. Similarly, with the sovereign blue bond, it's a 15 million US dollar bond issued by the government of Seychelles, but the impact investors were very clear. You have to use the money for sustainable fisheries. And these are financing tools which we can use to help countries actually transition to this blue economy. Because let's face it, it does come at a cost, right? And countries need to think about it.
Well, thank you very much. Again, that's also very, very interesting. So turning to Marc Naidoo now, what in your opinion are the best steps to take to encourage countries to really incorporate the principles of sustainable development, when thinking about ocean economies? Do you have any ideas about how the best way to go about this?
Thank you, Obi. So hearing the other panelists speak, there seems to be common themes. So there's Dr. Lopes mentioned that the blue economy has been neglected. Elba has also mentioned the strong community emphasis, and obviously Angelique has mentioned finance. And the way that you have to approach the subject is to change the mindset of states themselves. So initially, we saw this happening in the private sector, where the credit considerations before financing sustainability projects switch from a very risk-averse manner to things like what Angelique mentioned with debt for nature swaps and outcome metrics that were a bit out of the box. So states themselves have to approach the issue of the blue economy in a three-step process. The first is you need to realize that your blue assets are actually assets that are income generating. That's the first thing. The second is an asset that is income generating requires protection. So the second agenda should be to protect these assets. And the third, which I've just written an article, I think Angelique has read it. The most important bit of sustainability is the communities that are in the environments that we are trying to protect. So if the third step is to look at these assets as something that communities can then go and develop further in order to better their livelihoods, then that entire three-step process all flow into each other, and that is how we get recyclable capital. And whilst blended finance, this is not anything against what you've said, Angelique. I can see you smiling there. The blended finance is great, don't get me wrong, but it's not the end of the journey. What we need to get to a point is where it's private sector capital that wants to invest in these assets. And the only way we can do that is if we scale them and we show that they can make money. So for instance, let's just put this kind of three-tiered approach into practice. Let's look at carbon emissions. And something, I seem to be picking on Angelique again, but seagrass meadows, for instance. If we treat seagrass meadows as an asset in terms of its carbon or hydrocarbon absorption properties, that can be offset against a fee that is charged by a state for people to come in to see, the ocean and be a tourist and whatnot. But it can't be for free. Then taking those funds, you pay communities to help develop those resources, protect them, and also in time increase those seagrass meadows. What happens when you increase that scalability? Scalability results in private sector being interested in these projects because there's an income generating asset behind it. And that's, Dr. Lopes is 100% correct. The industry's been neglected for a lack of understanding. But if you think about the fact that resources or coastal resources, marine resources are just as lucrative as land resources, the entire mindset shifts to the point where people are now saying, okay, well, let's protect these things, let's make money. And unfortunately, that sustainability is great, but I'm a finance lawyer, and I will tell you the way that you motivate people is through cash. And there's no reason why cash cannot work side by side with sustainability in order to reach fiscal policy.
Thank you very much, Marc. You've kind of hit the nail on the head. So I'm going to go back to Dr. Lopes. Dr. Lopes, how do you assess the current state of affairs, in terms of the efforts being made so far to address these issues at the moment? What is your assessment of the progress that's been made and the effectiveness?
Well, normally the debate about blue economy is very much associated with preoccupations on environmental protection, which I don't want to minimize. But as it has just been explained, it tends to see it from a conservation angle,
yes,
and not so much from an economic angle. And there is no reason why one and the other cannot be tackled together for the benefit of all. So this idea that we need to destroy the environment to create economic opportunity has now more and more being challenged. And I think there is now evidence that you can do both. You can grow and you can protect the environment if you do the right things, if you have the right choices, the right policies, the right regulations. But more important than anything, if you actually attribute value to actually the protection of the environment, what we have not done so far. So the translation of that has been carbon tax or carbon market.
Yeah.
So it's important for us to unbundle that discussion, because the way it is tackled can be beneficial or not to Africa. If we say, we are just going to implement a carbon tax and we give to the enterprises that rich countries are going to help with the carbon transition technologically as well, with subsidies. And we don't have the commensurate means for poor countries to attribute the same subsidies to their enterprises. We don't have a level playing field. Therefore, you put, for instance, African enterprises into a disadvantage in relation to their European or other competitors, because they are getting a subsidy that the Africans cannot afford.
All right.
Then second, you decide how the certifications are going to be done. You define the standards and the regulations. The Africans have very poor regulatory capacity, so they will have to adopt the ones that are imposed by the mighty. So you have a second disadvantage. Then the third disadvantage comes from the fact that if you start implementing carbon taxation immediately to the imports, but you don't do the same for your internal market, because you allow X number of years for your enterprises to transition, it is another way of introducing protectionism. So it's a third penalization of the Africans. Worse even, if you don't actually contribute to innovation and transfer of the tech opportunities to smaller countries or poor countries, you are going to penalize them from going into the kind of transitions that you can afford. Therefore, you push them into the provider of natural resources or commodities corner, which is where they are right now. So you don't allow structural transformation. And finally, to wrap it all, you actually do this proclaiming that it is to protect the planet. Nobody can be against it. But then, you just maintain the principle that to protect the planet, you don't deal with inequality. So the inequality is like a different debate, but it is not. It is the same debate. So that's why when Angelique mentions that you need different innovations in the finance field,
yes,
one of them is how we deal with carbon markets, not just taxation. And when we deal with carbon markets, what you realize, I'm going to give you a very graphic example. Tesla is an enterprise that has never made any profit from the sales of its cars. But it keeps rising in the stock exchange to the point that during the pandemic, it went from 96 billion value to $1 trillion value. What is this based on? What is this based on? It's based on the fact that they possess a technology that is seen as having value in the future, right? Like electric vehicles, some of their space innovation, it's considered to be the way of the future. So the value is completely based not on what they are doing, but what their potential is. Well, what about if we look into the environment the same way? We protect the seas, or you protect the forests because of their value for the future. But that is not the case. On the contrary, African countries are penalized when they try to raise capital because their raising of capital is seen from a risk perspective as more riskier not to the environment, but riskier for the financial agent, economic agent. So unless we change this discussion, we are going to turn it around. And that's why, it's so important for us to associate the debate about carbon taxation, carbon markets, to also the potential. And if we do that, then, you'll have to pay for the conservation. So that's why the Africans should not be going to these discussions and negotiations with a begging hand, but rather putting their assets at the table and saying, look, if you really want to attain those targets, there is no way it's possible without us and our assets. What? Environmental assets. Therefore, they have to be paid for. If they were just paid the same way Tesla, just one enterprise, was paid, we don't have a problem. It would have brought more capital than we can even absorb. So that is the inequality that we are living.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very important message that needs to get out there, for people to know, where we should be heading. Let me go back to Angelique. Talking about the issue of support for the development of sustainable blue economies. What are your thoughts on that? Given where you come from and the work that has been done in the country, in the whole area.
Yeah, I mean, so it's just picking up on what Dr. Lopes has just said in terms of these risks that is seen with investing in African countries. It was quite interesting that in order for us to get the interest costs down for the sovereign blue bond, we had to have a partial guarantor, the World Bank, come in on the deal, as well as the Global Environment Facility to support us with a concessionary loan should we need it once payment begins. So just to indicate that we had to tap to many different avenues to get those interest costs down, and I'm sure Marc can sort of speak to more of that, being closer to the transaction. But that's definitely one form of support that we've seen for the blue economy. I think the other thing that's quite interesting, and here very much looking at the narrative around COVID-19 recovery, which now has gone, in the direction of the blue recovery. A lot of people are terming it that, and being seen as something, a lot of small island developing states are being pushed towards. And I'm sure the narrative around, Africa really looking to the blue economy to support with this post-COVID-19 recovery. So in that respect, there seems to be a lot of policy signals. I'm yet to see the real delivery on very much the conversations that Dr. Lopes and Marc has spoken to, where we're really talking about, the value of our ecosystem services, doing those assessments, treating our ecosystems on part when we're having these negotiations, not treating it as, yes, but is it really that much? And then of course we have all the methodologies imposed on us, and then we're tapping again into external expertise to find out how much carbon is there, and there's a whole long, elaborate, and expensive process. I think we've been slow to see that support come in on a wider scale. In the Seychelles, we've been getting philanthropic support to do the mapping of the seagrass meadows in the entire EEZ of Seychelles, with the intention of then indicating to the UN climate conference and process, this is how much gigatons of carbon our seagrass meadows are absorbing as an ecosystem service to the globe. But this has been philanthropic support. I think Marc is right. Like it's not a contradiction, but we need to move a step the next step, which is not that dependency on philanthropy, which is great to have a showcase, have a model to test those scenarios, but we need to move a step closer to private capital, because I think it's absolutely right that sustainability and economy, as well as equity, I really like the reference Dr. Lopes made there, it does actually all work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So going back to Elba, can you kind of look at the overall importance of the maritime resources in your area, in the development, in development as a whole? How do you assess that? The importance of the maritime resources as a whole.
In my opinion, there are many different marine resources. They depend on which part of the world you live. And so it's very important to have different strategies which focus on the strength of your regions. And national ones are important, but I think that we need to start as close as possible. For this, we need to work in the development of regional blue economy strategy documents, which could be the base of the rice policies. Here in the Canary Islands, this summer, our first blue economy strategy was based by the regional government. All the agents of the different sectors work together in the recognition of the strengths and weakness of all the marine resources that are represented in our islands. Now, our next step is the definition of the road for the implementation of our strategy. I would like to say that I think that it's very important to have a political future with the strength enough to develop the policies that our sector needs. I would like to mention the example of Portugal, which has a Ministry of Blue Economy. This feature in Portugal has made it possible to achieve maturity through many initiatives of blue economy in which the rest of Europe countries are very far from, I think.
Thank you very much. So I double back to Marc. Marc, there are various legal frameworks existing that are supposed to guide the whole area of sustainability and blue economy and all that. How do you as a legal person, how do you assess those international frameworks and how they are translated, locally. What's your assessment?
So I think it's the problem that we have with the market is that every 2 weeks there seems to be another framework that comes out. Mm-hmm. And that is generally from people that are qualified to do it or people that want to be seen to be doing it. So as a legal practitioner, it's incredibly frustrating because from a financing perspective, you are trying to negotiate finance documents and people are throwing at you principles that you've never heard. So from a legal perspective, the way that we look at things is from a sustainability point of view, the bedrock is the UN SDGs. And we go back to that as the overarching principle of sustainability is do good, but do no harm. And if you follow, it sounds quite basic, but if you follow that principle throughout drafting documents and you understand that there has to be that juxtaposed position of doing the right thing but ensuring that there's nothing harmful that happens, you generally can make the existing frameworks fit into what you're doing. So there's the EU taxonomy on sustainable finance. There's the Poseidon principles in terms of carbon emissions and ship recycling. These are all things that feed into a basic understanding that needs to be had in terms of how to approach the legal side of it. What I would say is there does seem to be an increase in third-party advisors that will almost bless a transaction in terms of sustainability. And whilst there is different value in that, it goes back to the principle that not all sustainability is equal. And I sound like a broken record here, but there's no point protecting a planet where the people that live on the planet now don't have a good life. And that is how, even in the legal framework, when you're looking at these credit decisions on a financing perspective, you have to look behind the structure to see what is the actual net benefit of the people that are in these communities. We saw this with mining in South Africa in the early 2000s up until 2010, where companies were told, look, you can do your operations, but there's an obligation on you to make sure the communities around those mines, whatever infrastructure you build, those communities have to benefit in some way. And obviously the market has now come a lot further than that, where there's actually, you can say, look, you can do these things, but you have to do them sustainably. And that's, going back to the question of legal framework, I think sometimes, this was supposed to be a marathon, sustainability, sustainable finance, blue economy. Sometimes it feels like we're running on a treadmill here, because all that's happening is we go a bit and then somebody comes back and says, oh, look, there's a new framework that you have to look at. There's these new considerations. Oh, the Western countries are sitting in Glasgow, determining the fate of us poor Africans. And that's not the mindset we need to have. We need to have the fact that have a basic understanding of who has the net benefits of a sustainable transaction and work within a limited framework. And I think that's the way we have to approach this going forward. It's the way we develop as a continent, and it's the way that we attract private sector capital, because no one wants to go to a negotiation on a finance document and it be one-sided, where you are given a term sheet. Angelique will attest to this, where you are given financing terms and it comes to you signed. There's no negotiation in that. That's not how a free market works. So we need to get to the point where people in the legal industry, at least, need to have a fundamental understanding of what sustainability is. And then we can move to talk about frameworks. And if you're not sure, go and look at the UN SDG goals. I believe the first 6 all relate to financial inclusion and quality of life. So maybe if people have an understanding of that, then they can actually approach a deal and add proper value.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to turn to Dr. Lopes again. Dr. Lopes, this is a Brazil Africa Forum. So we begin to think that Africa and Brazil probably might have some opportunities, in this whole contest. Reasons for collaboration or cooperation. Do you see any areas where such opportunities might exist?
Well, the Brazil-Africa relations have been going into a completely reverse in relation to what they were just a couple of years ago.
Yes.
There is much less intensity in the exchanges between Africa and Brazil. But when things were going in a different direction, and there was a growing trade partnership and a number of other initiatives, it was mainly due to the very important presence of some key Brazilian champions in the continent. That included mining companies and also some construction infrastructure companies. They were the leaders in the presence of Brazil from an economic point of view. And what has happened in Brazil over the last years is that all of these champions have been through a lot of trouble. So partly is due to internal domestic policy reasons that they have retracted from a number of external ventures and investments. But it's also partly due to the lack of interest on the part of the federal government. So unless there is a change in both, the appetite of the key champions in in Brazil towards Africa, and a change in the federal attitude towards relations with Africa, we are not going to see any improvements that will allow for even an expansion of the areas of intervention, which eventually could include blue economy related activities.
Yes, yes. Okay, that's telling it like it is. Angelique, also let me also ask you, looking at the same question from Seychelles, do you see possibilities of cooperation, collaboration?
Absolutely. I think there's a tremendous opportunity, and I'll take a slightly different focus and talk about knowledge sharing and expertise exchange. I think there's always a sentiment that we need to wait for the North to come and build our capacity. I think that must be wrong. We have a lot of capacity, and there's a lot of potential for South-South cooperation, and this is something we should definitely tap into. And Africa and Brazil and other countries in the regions should definitely find a way to make sure that after this conference, we're finding a way of continuing the dialogue, continuing the exchange beyond a conference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll go on to Elba, just to get your thoughts on some of the policies that you've implemented that have to deal with sustainability. Can you just give us some examples of some of the things that you have done from your side?
Example of sustainability initiative that we had made in Canary Islands.
Yes.
Okay, I think that I would like to explain that here we have a very big problem with our electricity. Okay, we don't have enough renewable offshore energies. Okay, only 50% of our energy is from the renewable energies. The rest of these are for thermal central. Okay, so for us now we are working to increase all these renewable energy, but looking for the sea, looking for the ocean. We think that the future are the offshore renewable energies. We are preparing to our companies to introduce in this new sector, because as islands, we don't have enough space, we do not have enough land to develop development of all the renewable that we need. Okay, we are 2 million of people living here, and we have 50 million of tourists every year. So for us, the energy is a very huge problem, and we would like to think that this is a very important step that we have to do.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. So, Marc, looking to the future, what kind of guidance or advice would you give, to countries, policymakers on the whole issue of, maritime resources in national development and developing their strategies? What kind of suggestions will you give to them, just looking forward?
So I think I mentioned this a couple of years back when I spoke in Tunis on the matter, which seems a lifetime ago. But the whole, in any market, the key consideration is momentum. And momentum is what generates deals. It's what gets people interested in a sector, and it's how you crowd in capital. When the first blue bond was done by the Seychelles, there was this fervor amongst the market where everyone had something to do with it, even if they didn't. They would have read an article on it and suddenly they were an advisor to it. And, going to the breakout sessions at that conference was quite nauseating, because people were just, going on about this blue bond. And, I thought to myself, wow, okay, so my closing words at the conference was, everybody likes deals. Deals is what gets the market moving. And we said, just go out and do deals, make this work. Educate credit committees, educate governments. There's different ways of approaching sustainability. Maybe it was COVID. Maybe sometimes COVID is a convenient crutch to use when things don't move. But it's almost 3 years since then, and the market is still not going where we all thought it would have gone. And it's crazy, because this whole ESG movement has started, and you would think, okay, well, considering that most people assume ESG just means environment, that people would actually start, investing more in the blue economy. So that's a long way of saying that the way forward is momentum. If you have a resource, approach that resource in the way that I described earlier as an income generating asset. It doesn't have to be a coastal resource, because obviously if you focus on coastal resources, you preclude inland states. But approach it on that basis and create the momentum in the market to get things done and get private capital. And it is private capital that will get this market off the ground. But also take into account that it needs to be momentum doesn't have to come at the cost of being a bit risk averse, in the sense that, yes, whilst these are income generating assets, you still need to protect them and you still need to do things the right way. So for instance, if you're building things offshore, energy production, or whatever projects are on coastal environments, consider the fact that there's noise pollution that comes up that affects the sea life. There's a bunch of things that you need to consider, but a pragmatic approach with momentum that states need to adopt and to include in their fiscal policy going forward is how we get this done. And I guess the time for talking, is over, because I'm tired of writing articles on the blue economy. I just want to do deals now.
Interesting. Interesting. That's very good.